Hey, what's up, guys?
Hi.
Come on in. Hey, kids, we're gonna have a seat over here at the table. So did you guys notice anything when you came in the room today?
The big box.
We got your parents some gifts, all right? Oh, okay. So some things that your parents would maybe not be expecting, okay? First off, let's see. A mug.
Ooh,
A doxology mug. Here's what is great about this mug right here is it has a guitar pick in it, signed by Richie Fike. Do you guys know who Richie Fike is? No?
No.
Okay. Yeah, me neither. So I noticed your dad when he came in, and he has a haircut kind of like me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think he's gonna love this right here. This is super fashionable wig. What do you think?
Yeah.
Does it look good?
It's awesome.
Lily, what do you think?
Yeah.
Do you like it? What was that? Did you guys put something in there?
No.
You better come look. Whoa!
Oh, there.
Love it. Were you guys expecting that?
No.
No. That was a pretty big surprise.
Our parents were the big surprise. Thanks a lot, mister.
Oh, gosh. Hey, grab a Bible this morning if you got one handy and start making your way to Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1. I'll meet you there in just a second. Luke chapter 1. It's on page 698 on the Bibles that look like this. If you need to borrow a Bible or keep one, we'd love to give that to you if you need a Bible as our gift to you today. Page 698 on those. Luke chapter 1. Today, as we launch into our Christmas series that we've called Unexpected on this balmy 80-degree day in Texas. Talk about unexpected. It doesn't feel anything like Christmas outside. At least it's starting to look a little like Christmas inside. So the decorations out in the foyer, huge thanks to Cameron and his whole team and a couple of volunteers. I know I saw Jason Williams and Eric Gonzalez around here. They took off work to come help us do all of that this week. So if you know them and you see them, make sure and tell them thanks. And the rest of you that I'm sure volunteered and helped in that, I'm sorry I didn't run into you in the hall, but thank you to you as well. It looks great. We're glad all of you guys are here for Christmas at Doxology. You know, one of the things that I love the most about the whole Christmas season, not just here, but certainly here, are the traditions. And not just the tradition like general, overarching, singular, like the individual traditions. I love them. I love like weeks before Thanksgiving for some of you, or the week of Thanksgiving, or right after Thanksgiving, or maybe this weekend. The whole tradition, all of the traditions around getting a tree and putting up the tree and the ornaments. And we have little specific traditions in some of our families about how we do that every single year. Like, how do we choose who gets to put the star at the top of the tree every single year? Some of us have those traditions, and we love them. But it's not just the initial part of seeing Christmas coming. It's all, as it's approaching, we have these traditions, things that some of us do every single year. Like some of us always go to the Nutcracker. It's just part of our Christmas. Christmas isn't complete until we've done it, kind of things. Some of us, we always go caroling. Christmas isn't complete until we've done it. We love the traditions. And then when it comes time to the day, like Christmas Eve service at Doxology, it's a huge tradition for some of us. And candles and the candlelights and the kids and the carols and all of that stuff. It's a huge part of our Christmas season. We love it. I love that. And even whose house do we go to and when? How do we decide? It's a tradition. And some of us, we love the traditions around Christmas. And I started thinking a little bit about that this past week and wondering why that is that I love that so much. And I think for me, I don't know about you, but for me, in a world that's just changing so fast and everything's different and everything's changing, it's like at least I can count on Christmas, that I've got a couple of things all along the way that aren't going to change, that just can anchor me to the past, kind of no matter what. And I love that about the Christmas season. And I know a bunch of you like the traditions around Christmas as well, because you tell me, I like the traditions at Christmas. Don't forget about the traditions at Christmas. You like that. And in fact, I've joked with you over the years, the two seasons that it's hardest to be a pastor, actually Christmas and Easter. And you would think that would be different. You would think that would be our favorite seasons every single year. But every pastor that I know that I talk to, they're like, no, man, that's hard. And it's hard because everybody comes into Christmas, and specifically Christmas at church, with two expectations. Number one, don't change anything. And number two, impress me this time. Like we don't want surprises, okay? Don't monkey around with it. Don't try to get cute. I want to hear the same story. I want to read the same passages. I want to sing the same songs. I want to do the same things every single year. I want it to stay the same. Don't change anything on me. No surprises. But I'm thinking about bringing my neighbor this year, so like ratchet it up a notch. Can you impress me? Like don't surprise me, but impress me every single year. With a few exceptions, most of us, when it comes to the Christmas season, we don't like surprises at all. Which is strange because when you look back at that same story and the same passages, it's filled with surprises for all kinds of people. And in particular for a young girl in a little redneck fishing village called Nazareth by the shores of the Sea of Galilee, who found herself in the middle of an unexpected moment. It just so happened to be a moment that changed her whole world. I wonder if you've lived through a moment like that. I mean, most of us have. We have those moments in our life that just even as we're living the moment, we know this is a moment that changes everything. From this moment on, even as you're living in the moment, you know, I'm, for the foreseeable future, going to be able to subdivide my whole life between before this moment and after this moment. You have moments like that? And some of us, they're great moments. It's the moment like when we first got our driver's license and we get in the car and it's only us and we drive away and we think, even in the moment, like everything's different all of a sudden. Some of you, when your parents dropped you off at college, they drove away. You just thought, this is a moment that changes everything here. My whole world is different. Some of you, the first day you walked into a new job, new career, you thought everything changes from here. The moment that you saw him get down on one knee and you just thought, even as it's happening, everything's changing right this moment. My whole world is different in a good way. She shows up in the room with a pregnancy test. The adoption agency calls. And you think, in the moment, everything changes from here. But you know, they're not all great moments, the moments like that. Some of you have lived through the moment where the phone rings in the middle of the night. You know, when the phone rings in the middle of the night, you really don't even have to know who's on the other end of the phone or what they want. You just know when the phone rings in the middle of the night, everything's changing. And not necessarily in a good way. Monday, Carrie and I were at a funeral for a family member, 47-year-old Navy fighter pilot, whose wife saw his commanding officers walking up to the front door from her Ring doorbell. And she knew in the moment, nothing will ever be the same for me or for my two teenage sons. It's a moment, everything changes, and not necessarily in a good way. Some of you have had the moment where you go in for routine tests. Doctor calls back and leaves a message on your answering machine, and you hear it, and it says, I need you to come into the office immediately. And you know, the whole world just changed. Your teenage son or daughter sits you down and says, Mom, Dad, we need to talk. And the world's different. When you catch them in an affair, when she doesn't come home one night. It's a moment, and everything changes, and you're pretty sure it's not changing for the better. What do you do in moments like that? How do you make it through moments like that? Where the hand that you're dealt doesn't seem like it's consistent with the hand of a good God. Where the plan that's in front of you doesn't seem to be in sync with the promises of a God who's kind, who sees, who knows, who loves you, who's for you. How do you live through those moments? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. Because though you may not have ever thought about it this way before, it turns out the very beginning of the Christmas story in Luke's account starts with exactly that kind of story. In fact, two stories just like that. The very beginning of Luke chapter 1 tells a story of two people who are at the very end of their story, who are grieving because their story hasn't turned out like they always dreamed it would turn out. They'd prayed and prayed and prayed for decades for a baby. And they were towards the end of their story. They were still praying, but not because they believed it would happen, just because it was a habit when they went to God in prayer. Then there was a young girl who was on the other end of the story spectrum, a young girl named Mary, who finds herself living in the middle of a moment when her whole world changes. And in the moment we're going to see today, she's not so sure it's for the better. Young girls in Nazareth couldn't have had a whole lot of dreams, but they had to have some. We know that Mary was engaged to Joseph. Betrothed is the word that the story uses. Their families had reached an agreement. They'd come together for an agreement, and he'd gone away to prepare a place for them to live. He would come back, and she didn't know exactly when. It would be unexpected, and he would take her to be with him in that place that he was building for her, attached to his father's house. That's the way marriages worked in those days. And she knew to expect it, but she didn't know when to expect it. That was part of the joy of it. It would be unexpected. But she had to even have some dreams beyond that. They would get married. Lord willing, they would have children. How many children? She had to have some dreams. The boys first and then the girls, or boy, girl, only boys, only girls, we don't know. But all of us, even if we don't have big dreams, have dreams. Some version that's us specific for the American dream, most of us. Well, whatever the version of the Nazarene dream was for a young girl living near the shore of the Sea of Galilee, Mary certainly had some kind of perspective of how her life would turn out from there. But she didn't expect this moment. There was a moment that changed everything. And she wasn't so sure it was for the good. Look at the story where we pick it up. Luke chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. Luke chapter 1, beginning in verse 26. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. Oh yeah, we'll come back to her. Remember the couple that starts Luke's story who felt like they were beyond their dreams? Turns out God wasn't done writing their story. And when we pick up Mary's story, Elizabeth is in the 3rd trimester of her own story of God writing a story nobody expected or anticipated, that she certainly didn't see coming. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." I read a Gallup poll this week as I was looking through people's perspectives on angels. You realize that somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of Americans believe in angels. A 2008 study said that somewhere around 55% of Americans report having had an encounter with an angel. That's kind of cool. You can Google some of those stories. It's everything from people who find themselves in a catastrophic accident, who find themselves with somebody sitting beside them in this wrecked car, comforting them while they wait for the paramedics to arrive. And then once the police arrive, the person disappears before they can be questioned by police. Amazing. All the way from that kind of story to a woman you can find on YouTube who says she's able to channel the archangels and answer any of your problems for a low introductory price of $37 a month. Like, I don't know what you think about when you think about encountering an angel, how you picture that moment in your head. But every time we see the angels show up in the Bible, first response doesn't seem to be being comforted. In fact, artists have sort of sanitized this moment. The way that Luke describes this moment, if you had a photograph of this moment, you would not put it on your Christmas card. This is not a pretty moment. In fact, when he talks about Mary's response, we realize this is a phone call in the middle of the night kind of moment. This is officers showing up at your house in their dress uniform kind of moment. It says that Mary's troubled, verse 29, greatly troubled at his words, and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. See that word, troubled? It's a word that means deeply stirred or agitated. It refers to acute emotional distress. That's this kind of word. This is not a sweet moment. Mary, in this moment, is afraid that she's losing her mind. She's troubled, acute mental anguish. And Luke tells us why. It's not just the presence of the angel in her bedroom or her front yard or wherever this moment takes place. It's the words that he said. It's the greeting that he gave. What did he say? Well, he said, "The Lord is with you." And think about this. You don't know Mary, but you know you. And I know me, so I'll just speak for me. If an incredible angel shows up in my house and says, "Greetings, you who are favored by people, the Lord is with you." God sees. "Greetings, Chris. God knows." I don't know about you in that moment, but I got a question in that moment, maybe several. Like, okay, God sees. Exactly what did he see? How much did he see? For how long was he watching? The Lord knows. He's with you. All right, when was he with me and why did he send you? What was the moment that he sent you to talk about that the Lord saw and sent you to be a part of? Wouldn't all of us have to say the message, God is with you, without some degree of context or explanation, without knowing the rest of the story, is not necessarily great tidings and good joy, depending on where you've been and what you've done, what you've thought. When you thought nobody was watching, this isn't necessarily good news or a good moment for Mary. She's troubled to her core. So the angel responds, verse 30. Angel said to her, "Don't be afraid, Mary. You found favor with God. You will conceive, give birth to a son, and you're to call him Jesus. He'll be great, called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Okay, now some of you know what it's like to be in those moments that are the moments that change everything and you're not so sure that it's good and somebody comes in and drops good theology on you. You had those moments? They say things that are true, but that for the life of you, you can't figure out how to connect with the situation. You know those moments? Like you're suffering, you're grieving, you're a victim of someone or something, and somebody comes in and unloads Romans 8:28 on you. God causes all things to work together for good, those who know him, called to his purpose. Yeah, that's probably true. I don't know how it fits here. I don't see how that could be true now. You find yourself fighting an addiction or a habit, getting on the other side of a habit that's destroying you, but then you fail again. Someone comes in and says, well, the one who started a good work in you will be faithful to complete it in the day of Christ Jesus. And you think, even if that's true, I'm not sure that's true of me. God's promise doesn't seem to be possible from a place like this. Have you ever been in one of those moments? You know that in those moments, even true words don't ring true. Comforting words actually don't comfort you. They trouble us more. That's where Mary's at. Angel appears to Mary and it troubles her to her core. She wonders what kind of greeting this is. And the angel says, well, you're going to conceive. You're going to give birth to a baby, a boy. Call him Jesus. He's the one who's been promised from the moment Adam and Eve made a mistake and ate the fruit. The rescuer that God promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. The king that God promised to David and Solomon. He's going to call you mommy. The one who reigns forever is going to be your kid. And instantly, Mary's thinking, you've got the wrong address. Those are incredible promises for someone. Those are promises that are going to come true someday for someone. Those words can't possibly be true for me right now, not under these circumstances. In fact, she points out the circumstances. Verse 34, they're familiar. She says, how will this be? Mary asked the angel, since I'm a virgin. You understand what she's asking? Okay, Gabriel, how can God's promise possibly apply to my circumstances? And in some ways, you know, if you've been there, that's even more troubling than an angel showing up in your house. That's maybe even more troubling than the idea that God's been watching you and knows. The idea that God's good news must have been meant for somebody else because it can't possibly apply to you. That's where Mary's at in this moment. She says, how can this be? You notice something about the question she asked. She's not asking it in a high-handed way. It's not just that she got cynical. Some of us get cynical in moments like that when we don't feel like God's promise can apply to us. That's not where Mary goes. Look where she goes. Luke's already given us a clue to the posture she takes. It's back in verse 39. Look back at verse 39. Remember when he showed up, said Mary was greatly troubled. We talked about that word at his words, and she wondered what kind of greeting this might be. That word wondered's probably not the best translation of that word. It's a Greek word that we get our English word dialogue from, but it's actually a banking term, actually an accounting term that means to audit. To audit. We do an audit at Doxology every single year. Actually, volunteer for it. We volunteer we ask another company, outside company, to come in, and we hand over all of our books. And they look over all of our books, and they look at the transactions that we've made and all of the ways that we've done everything that we've done to make sure that what we say is happening with our finances and what's supposed to be happening with our finances actually happening with our finances. That's their job. More on that in a couple of weeks. I'll just tell you if you're curious, we had a totally clean audit. We got that report back not too long ago. In fact, our audit not just came back with a clean audit, but the auditor came back with compliments and said, we actually go to other churches and other nonprofits and tell them about how you guys do your books and tell them they ought to do their books the way that you do their books. Extraordinary compliment for our business office. Those people do an incredible job. Just bragging about how easy they make his job. But being an auditor is not always easy. In fact, sometimes it's really hard. In fact, most of the time, the job of the auditor is to come into a place and to reconcile things that for one reason or another aren't easy to reconcile. To take things that don't add up in a normal way and figure out how they add up. That's the job of an auditor. When there doesn't seem to be an explanation and things don't reconcile, the auditor comes in. That's his job or her job. It's to come in and keep searching, to keep investigating, to keep asking questions in order to reconcile something that doesn't seem to add up on its face. That makes sense? That's what Mary's doing in this moment. And it's a good strategy for us. When we find ourselves in those moments, we realize our whole world's changed and I'm not sure it's for the good. How do I reconcile the hand I've been dealt with the hand of a good God? Her example invites us to audit our affliction. Audit your affliction. You notice she doesn't just make an adjustment in the book. Say, well, God's promise and my circumstances, they don't really seem to reconcile, so I'll just put a little asterisk by it and cross it out. Put an asterisk there by the promise and decide the promise might apply to other people, but it doesn't apply to me. It doesn't work here, so it's not true for me. It's probably not true for you, but it's true for somebody somewhere someday. So we'll just cross out the promise and cook the books on the reconciliation there. That's not what the auditors, that's not what Mary does. And you know what else she doesn't do? She doesn't get super spiritual on this and just cross out her circumstances and say, well, it's probably really not that hard. It's probably really not that bad. Like, it's just easy. God's good all the time, God's good. My life's not hard. This doesn't struggle to reconcile with God's goodness. I'm not struggling with how to reconcile God's kindness. I'm not struggling with how to reconcile God's justice in this. I'll just take God's word and not even do the math. We'll just kind of leave it there, cross out my circumstances, pretend like they don't really exist. That's not the job of a good auditor, and that's not what Mary does, and it's not what you should do when you find yourself in those moments where things don't seem to add up. Notice in this moment, the promise doesn't seem to fit the circumstance. These two things don't seem to add up. And so she asks the question, how can this be? And you notice the angel gives her an answer? Look at verse 35. Angel answered, the Holy Spirit will come on you. Power, Most High God will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. That's an extraordinary promise. In fact, we're going to come back to this whole passage next week. Because the thing that the angel says here and the promise to Mary is a staggering, staggering promise and extraordinarily relevant to your life. We'll talk about that next week. The angel says God's going to do it. He's got a plan to reconcile his promise with your circumstance. And it's not one you could have ever imagined. It's not one you ever could have drawn up. It's not one you ever could have seen coming. This is a story that's unique to you. But you need to notice 2 things about this. The angel says, you got to know 2 things, Mary. First, we'll come back to this. The angel says, God's put someone near you, even though your story is unique, she has a story that's similar. It's similar enough that the 2 of you are going to be able to walk together through the days ahead, and you're going to need each other to hold each other up in the face of the story that you're both going to be called to live. And the second thing that the angel says, hey, God's given you his word. God's given you his word, and no word from God will ever fail. God doesn't get the address wrong. God doesn't make accounting errors. God never over-promises and under-delivers. So if the plan doesn't seem to reconcile with the promise, keep auditing, keep asking, keep searching, keep looking. Those are really important things we'll come back to in just a second. Notice something else about what the angel, how he responds. You notice he answers her immediate question, but he doesn't solve all of her problems. And in fact, his answer to her question actually creates some new problems that she has, right? So this isn't a message that just says, trust God, and as soon as you decide that you're going to trust God with your life, then it's all going to be hearts and stars and Skittles and rainbow puking unicorns from this day out, as long as you live. That's not Mary's story. She's just been told that God has good news for her, that she's found favor with God. And yet if the way it works out, the way that she knows what the angel has said is true, the way that she's going to know God's for her is she's going to be pregnant, even though she's not married, in a world where that could get you killed. The angel doesn't tell her how the rest of the story is going to go. So you have to understand what kind of this changes everything moment this is for Mary. She has to imagine that this is one of those moments that's not filled with joy for her. And in fact, if you notice in the passage, joy doesn't show up in this passage. Joy shows up in the next scene, in the next passage, in a different place. After the resolve is when she finds rejoicing. Look how she responds. Verse 38. She says there in that moment that changes everything, and she still doesn't understand everything. I'm the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. And then the angel left her. Doesn't that kind of take your breath away? You understand what Mary says? She says, I'm the Lord's servant. He gets to write my story. And it's not fatalism. It's not just grit your teeth, resolve to hate your life for the rest of your life because God's bigger and stronger than you and he's probably going to force it out of you one way or the other. You might as well decide to live with it. It's not what this is. She's saying, God, this whole thing sounds impossible. It sounds completely impractical. I don't understand your plan. I can't comprehend possibly how you can get to your promise from this place. This feels like a terrible way to go about getting to your promise. I'm going to be pregnant with no husband. There is no way Joseph's sticking around for this thing. I'm getting kicked out of my house after this. I'm getting scorned by my friends after this. I'll be totally alone and unable to care for myself, much less this baby. That's where I see my story going from this moment with the hand that you're dealing me. And I trust that you're good. I trust that you're really for me and not against me. I trust that there's nothing better for me than what you would do to me and for me. And there's nothing I'd rather have than whatever you give, however it looks from my vantage point. She decides to rearrange her life, to reorganize her plans, to reorient her dreams toward the certainty of his promise, regardless of what it looks like from her vantage point. She says, may your word be accomplished, God. You write the story. Because you write better endings than I do. Mary resolves, I'm going to trust him from here. Look at the next thing she does. She runs. Look where she runs. Verse 39. It says, at that time, literally that very day, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. She's still living with questions, right? She just said, may your word be accomplished. And the angel bails. He doesn't stick around and answer any more of her questions. He doesn't clean up all of the problems. She's resolved, but there's no resolution. And she's still not rejoicing yet. She just had an unexpected moment that changed everything for her, and not necessarily in a good way. And what does she do? That very moment, that very day, she runs to community. And we have to too, when we find ourselves in moments like that. Somebody told her that someone that God had placed in her life near her had a similar story. Notice, not an identical story. It's not an identical story. Her story was unique. Your story is unique. Your circumstances are different. But that's not something to keep you from community. It wasn't for Mary. She realizes that God's placed someone near her with a similar enough story that they could walk together and hold one another up and walk through the next steps of resolve, whatever that looked like in their life, while they wait for rejoicing on the other side someday. You got to have people like that in your life. I bet God's put people like that near you. Their story's not the same as yours, but I bet if you'd tell your story, you'd find out it's similar. But that's the thing, and it's the thing for both of these women. They both have to tell their story. And listen, somebody has to go first. And think about that. Mary runs to community. She finds Elizabeth. Elizabeth's got a story, and it's a story that's hard to tell. Mary's got a story, and it's a story that's hard to tell. And somebody has to tell their story first. You know, the same thing happens in community groups all over Fort Worth every single week. Happens in Reengage nearly every single Wednesday. People share their stories. They have the courage to go first. And in the moment that they go first, something happens. One person's story paves the way for another person's hope. But you never know it until the story's put out there. Mary's example, my own experience, one of the reasons that I would tell you, if you're not in a community group, if you're not in Reengage, and you're at all the resolution kind of person when it comes to New Year's, that needs to be at the top of your list. In fact, you can take that step today, just put it on the connection card. Resolution made, we'll help you take the step, make it as simple as we possibly can for you. But you got to have community in your life, because you never know when one of those moments is going to come. And when the unexpected moment comes, it's going to be unexpected. But you can expect the unexpected moment to come enough that you know they come for everybody. And you ought to live near somebody that you know well enough to share your story. Because it's those moments you might just find somebody else has a similar story, can walk with you the rest of the journey of resolve, even while you're waiting for rejoicing and resolution. It's easy when it comes to Mary to see that, isn't it? Because we know the rest of her story. We know how the rest of the story goes. We know, yeah, but in her story it was worth it to live with resolve while she waited for rejoicing, because we know the rejoicing would come. And in fact, we even know some of those problems that she had to have were going to get solved. An angel was going to go, the same angel, to Joseph and bring him along. was going to get simpler. They were going to go together. And in fact, they would have a crisis, like fear for their lives and have to flee. But even at that moment was a gift because they found themselves living in Egypt for a period of time, away from all of the people looking at them with crooked eyes, trying to figure out, are those the people that we heard the story about? And after a while, they'd get to come back home. And Jesus would grow up and he'd do miracles, staggering things she'd get to see. She'd have her doubts. The story wouldn't always be good. She'd find herself at a foot of a cross and see this sweet baby boy crucified. Wasn't always going to go well. Wasn't always going to go easy. She'd find herself in another one of those moments that would divide her life, BC and AD. But then he'd rise from the dead. And he'd ascend to heaven so that he could send the Spirit to give life and hope and forgiveness and peace to people 2,000 years later who would still be rejoicing. And rejoicing would come for her. She just had to wait. It's not the end of her story. In a lot of ways, this is just the beginning of her story. I don't know the rest of your story. I don't know how God's going to write his way out of your story. The chances are it's going to be a struggle. Chances are it's not going to be easy. I mean, some of you, we can line you up and let you tell your story. And if you tell your story in the place that you find yourself, that moment that changed everything for you and you're not sure it's a good moment, we would all listen to your story and agree with you. Like, yeah, I don't know how God's going to get you out of this. No, I don't know how God's hand of goodness reconciles with the hand you've been dealt. I don't know. I don't see it. I can't imagine it. I don't know. I don't know how God can possibly get to his promise to you from the place that he has you. I don't know. But Mary's story, really her example encourages every single one of us. When you find yourself in one of those moments, when God's gift seems impossible or impractical or inconvenient, lean hard on what's undeniable. Even when God's gifts and the resolution and the rejoicing take a long time to arrive, even when they're wrapped in curious ways, keep auditing. Bring in another set of eyes. Keep trying to reconcile God's hand and the hand that you're dealt. Keep walking towards what's undeniable in every story up to this point. And it's what the angel said. God's promises never fail. You understand circumstances change? Even circumstances that we think could never change. Unreconcilable questions, some of us would admit, they find reconciliation. We can all go around this room, we can hear story after story of those too, from people who found themselves in a place that they said, I was totally hopeless. Today I've got hope. I was beyond help. And then I got help. I was totally unlovable. But today somebody loves me. Circumstances change. There's one thing that's undeniable. God's word never fails. In J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, at a particularly tough point in the story, the two main characters, Sam and Frodo, trying to figure out what kind of story they're in. Sam talks about how he used to think that all of the great stories that are told, stories of adventure, are all they're stories that start when a person just gets bored with their regular life. They think their life's too boring, so they go out looking for adventure. The longer he lived, the more he realized that's not necessarily true. In most of the greatest stories that are ever told, adventure comes to people, but it's not found in the form of adventure. It's found in the form of adversity and heartache and trial and circumstances and peril and danger and chaos, enemies, weakness, pain. And he starts to relate that to their own story, the things that they'd experienced, wondering where their story was headed from this point. And Frodo stops Sam and says, hey, Sam, you're going a little too fast in this story. You and I, Sam, are still stuck in the worst places of our story. It's all too likely that some will say at this point, shut the book now, Dad. We don't want to read anymore. Some of us this morning are living a moment in our story where everything in us wants to say, shut the book, Dad. I don't want to read anymore. And Mary's story at the very beginning of Christmas invites us to believe what we've come to see in her. Today's too soon to close the book. Today's the wrong day to give up hope. This morning's the wrong moment to take back the pen and take over the story. Or keep the pen. Decide that our own words will be more faithful to our story than his. If the Christmas story tells us anything, it's that God is at his very best in unexpected moments. And that he often gives his very best gifts in moments that are shaped by circumstances we would never choose. Moments that we would never ask for, that we never saw coming, but which can turn out with time and community to be even better than our wildest dreams. Would you pray with me? It's possible that you've come to this moment this morning and something unexpected happened in your heart. You didn't expect to feel anything or think anything or believe anything in a place like this. You just expected it to be one more Sunday, but it's clear in your heart that something's going on that was unexpected. And what that is the nearness of a really good God who sees you, who knows, but who wants to give you good news that Jesus has come to live the life that you were supposed to live and haven't, and to die the death before him, to take the wrath that you deserved and don't have to, that he died on a cross to pay for all of it, and he offers you a gift of his presence, his forgiveness, his hope, his peace, his love, that he's paid for with his life. It costs you nothing. He simply invites you to receive it. And if this morning that unexpected thing has come to you, I want to invite you to receive it. You can do it right where you're sitting. It's as simple as just in your own words, in the privacy of your heart, telling God, I believe that Jesus came to the earth, that he saw me, that you know who I am and what I've done, that Jesus paid for it in his death. He rose from the dead to give me forgiveness and hope, and I'll receive that gift this morning. Father, for the person that's receiving that gift today, I pray that you would give them courage to run towards community, to run towards a person whose story may be unique, may be different, but may be similar, that they could share and celebrate, and even before everything changes for them, they could walk towards resolution with resolve. Maybe a person that came with them today, Lord. Maybe a person in the Next Step Center. Maybe a person that they know is praying for this moment, even though they're in another state, because they know they came to church today and have been praying that you would do something unexpected. Would you give them the courage to find community, to run towards it? And for all of us, Lord, would you let us be prepared? Let us expect the unexpected in our life. And Lord, let us be people who audit all of our afflictions, who are willing to run to community before those moments, and who are willing to trust you with our story, even when we find ourselves in moments where it's hard to reconcile your hand with your heart. Would you let us see your face this Christmas? In Jesus' name, amen.